For most of its history, pizza was the food of the desperate. The poorest workers in one of Europe's poorest cities survived on it. Flat dough, cheap garlic, maybe some lard. Visitors to Naples called it disgusting. Writers described the people who ate it as revolting. Today, the global pizza industry is worth over $150 billion a year. So, how did food for people who had almost nothing become food eaten almost everywhere? The answer crosses thousands of years and thousands of miles. It involves a queen, a wave of immigrants, a world war, and a 30-minute delivery guarantee that changed everything. Every time pizza crossed a social boundary, it became something new. Mocked street food became royal cuisine. Immigrant comfort food became American obsession. A corner shop recipe became a global platform worth more than most countries' economies. This is the story of how that happened. Here's something most people don't think about. For thousands of years, pizza was impossible. Not because people hadn't figured out flatbread. They had. Egyptians baked it 6,000 years ago. Greeks covered it with herbs, cheese, and garlic. Romans made their own version, panis focaccius. That's where we get focaccia. Every Mediterranean culture had some version of flatbread with toppings, but none of them could make pizza. The dish we know, the one that conquered the world, couldn't exist yet. The missing ingredient was growing wild on a mountainside, an entire ocean away, the tomato. Tomatoes didn't reach Europe until the 1500s. Spanish explorers brought them from the Americas, along with potatoes, chocolate, and dozens of other crops the Old World had never seen. And when tomatoes arrived, Europeans refused to eat them. You have to understand the fear. Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family, the same family as belladonna, one of the deadliest plants on the continent. Eat the wrong nightshade and you die. Wealthy Europeans weren't going to take that risk. They grew tomatoes in their gardens as ornamental curiosities, pretty to look at, potentially fatal to eat. That was the consensus for nearly 200 years. So, who finally ate them? The people who couldn't afford to be afraid. In Naples, by the late 1700s, the city was a paradox. It was one of the largest cities in Europe. Over 300,000 people crammed into a dense tangle of narrow streets, crumbling buildings, and overcrowded tenements along the bay. It had grand churches and royal palaces. It also had one of the most desperate urban underclasses on the continent. They were called the Lazzaroni. Tens of thousands of day laborers, street workers, dock hands, people surviving hour to hour. They hauled goods at the port. They carried messages. They did whatever work they could find before sunset. They didn't have kitchens. Many didn't have permanent homes. They slept in doorways under market stalls along the waterfront. They needed food that was cheap, fast, and filling. Something you could eat standing up. Something you could eat with one hand while you walked to your next job. And they couldn't afford to worry about whether a plant might be poisonous. Hunger is a stronger motivator than fear. Street vendors figured out a solution. Flat dough baked fast in simple open-air ovens, topped with those tomatoes nobody else would touch. Add garlic, add oil, maybe some cheese if you could get it. Fold it in half, eat it walking, a complete meal for a few coins. It cost almost nothing, and it tasted extraordinary. This was pizza, real pizza. Born not from culinary ambition, but from hunger, from necessity, from people who had to make something out of almost nothing, and stumbled onto something incredible. The poorest people in one of Europe's poorest cities had accidentally invented what would become the most popular food on earth. But they didn't know that yet. Nobody did, because the upper classes wanted nothing to do with it. Italian author Carlo Collodi, the man who created Pinocchio, described pizza in 1886 as a complicated piece of work that is soiled and is sold in dirty establishments. European travelers who visited Naples wrote about pizza with open contempt. It was poor people food, peasant food, street food, nothing respectable. But there's a pattern in food history that repeats itself over and over. The dishes that begin at the bottom, the ones the wealthy mock and the respectable ignore, are often the ones that endure. Bread started as peasant fuel. Pasta was working-ass sustenance. Rice fed laborers. Potatoes were animal feed before they were human food. Pizza was about to prove that pattern in the most dramatic way imaginable, because the food that respectable people wouldn't touch was about to be served to a queen. And the story of how that happened, it might not even be true. How did food associated with poverty reach the royal palace? By the early 1800s, pizza had already started climbing slowly. Naples had actual pizzerias, not restaurants in the modern sense. These were open-air stalls with simple brick ovens and a wooden counter. Workers grabbed a slice and kept moving, but they were real businesses with real locations serving real customers. One of the oldest, Antica Pizzeria Port Alba, reportedly opened around 1830. It still operates today, nearly 2 centuries of continuous pizza making in the same neighborhood. And by the mid-1800s, 2 classic combinations had emerged that would define pizza forever. The marinara, tomato, garlic, oregano, and olive oil, named not for seafood, but because fishermen's wives made it for their husbands returning from the Bay of Naples. A simple pizza for working people, made by working people, and the combination of tomato, mozzarella, and basil, which would eventually become the most famous pizza in the world. Now, here's the story you've probably heard. In 1889, King Umberto and Queen Margherita of Savoy visited Naples. According to tradition, the queen grew tired of the elaborate French cuisine served at royal events. She wanted to try the local food she'd heard about. A pizzaiolo named Raffaele Esposito from Pizzeria Brandy was summoned to the royal palace to make pizza for the queen. He prepared 3 varieties. The queen reportedly loved the one with tomato, mozzarella, and basil, the red, white, and green of the Italian flag. Esposito named it Pizza Margherita in her honor. The world's most famous pizza, born from a royal endorsement, a queen's approval transforming street food into something legitimate. It's a perfect story. It's also heavily debated. Food historian Zachary Noak and others have spent years digging into the evidence. The original thank you letter, supposedly signed by a member of the Queen's household, shows signs that it may have been fabricated. The handwriting doesn't match other royal correspondence. Pizzas with tomato, mozzarella, and basil existed long before 1889. That combination wasn't new. And the royal household's own records contain no independent mention of this visit. Does that mean the story is entirely invented? Not necessarily. Something likely happened. A royal visit to a pizzeria in 1889 isn't implausible, but the neat narrative, Queen tastes pizza, falls in love, names it, pizza becomes respectable overnight, that's almost certainly a simplification, a legend built on a kernel of truth. But here's what matters more than whether the story is real. Someone felt the need to invent it. Someone thought pizza needed royal permission to be legitimate. That tells you exactly how low pizza's social status was. Even in Naples, even in the city that created it, pizza carried a stigma so deep that its champions felt they had to fabricate a royal endorsement just to earn basic respect. And that stigma extended well beyond Naples. This is something most people don't realize about Italian food. Italy wasn't a unified country until 1861. Before that, it was a patchwork of separate states, each with its own cuisine, dialect, and identity. The North and the South were practically different countries, and Northern Italians, wealthier, more industrialized, more connected to the rest of Europe, looked at the South with something between pity and contempt. Rome didn't develop significant pizza culture until the 20th century.